Hello and welcome to the third part of the Cloud tool. So here we're going to open it in Game Engine. In Unreal, I already have some things prepared. So I imported my digital asset, and I've also have a Megascans cloth material, which is like a very basic material, nothing special, mainly to like preview the UVs and see if those things are all working. So just let's test out our tool and make sure you have Houdini Engine installed and you are running. And we can just drag and drop this in the scene. So it should calculate. By default, it's expecting to not really output anything. So we have our parameters like we had in Houdini. And then here we have our inputs. So we have the three inputs like the plot, the pin group, and the collision group. So those three are all here. So that's all here, and let's test it out. So I need to add a plot object, which in this case can be a plane. So often use a plane. Let's say I want to simulate it here on these stairs. Maybe let's make it bigger. Let's so. And in our tool, I can now say my plot object is, instead of the geometry, we're going to say world outliner. So world outliner means picking a object in the scene. So we're going to say start picking, click on the plane, and say use as selection. So now that is here. You can also see that my tool jumped in here, so it's like actually overlapping. So we'll actually create a copy of that. And now it will, and now we can check the other inputs. So we have the pin, not gonna test it out one yet. I'm gonna go to collision, world outliner, and I want to pick collision, which is the stairs and this ground shape, and say use as collision. So now everything is in place, but I'm not really seeing anything. So the reason for that is we don't have that timeline here that we had in Houdini. So in Houdini, we have like a timeline at the bottom, but we don't have that here. So what we need to do in Houdini is we need to force to output a certain number, a frame number. So going back to Houdini, we, for example, need to force, for example, frame number 64 or for example 30 or something. Often I would just take something that's not too long because it will need to calculate until that point. So we're going to jump into our tool and we're going to use a shift net, so time shifting. And we can place this time shifting here after we do our simulation steps. So time shifting, and the frame number, we can right click delete channel so it's empty, because when it has a color it means it's actually linked to something, but in this case we just want to say you need to be in value 30. So this can also be exposed into our asset, of course. So if I go to assets, parameters, we can add frame number. So we might need to put this here. So output frame number, for example. This will be the exact frame number that we output. Press apply and accept this. And let's jump back into Unreal. So in Unreal, we're gonna go and rebuild our asset. Might take a moment. And you can see it already worked. So just adding that logic of shifting the time worked perfectly. So now I can have a small timeline or control of the time here. So if I say around frame number 4, we have like the very beginning. So we want to say, of course, frame number 30. So sometimes you might need to have to reset. It can happen in some situations that you need to again reset that cache because it is storing some data. And this works pretty well. So next up is we can also maybe check up here the pin group. So let's bring in a cube. This cube can be collided like so, like maybe this corner. Then we can go to geometry, pick the world, pick object, pick cube, use as selection, and as you can see, it's not updating. So this is why the reset button might be useful. So we're going to click reset to make sure it's getting the recent or up-to-date input. And now we have this. What we can also do is on these objects is select these two, and we're gonna say actor in game enable, so we don't have to see them all the time. So that works pretty well. Looks like, like this is stuck under something. Like when we start to decorate this, we can, for example, put a box on top of it. Like, for example, this part is like stuck between, for example, two boxes or something. Like so. Like it feels in that way. It looks really realistic. So you can play around with these approaches. Then I want to check out some of the parameters, and what I'm mainly interested in and what I mainly want to see is actually the polycount. So I'm going to switch to wireframe mode, and we can see that it has some decent wireframes. It's not too much. If we again want more quality, then we need to, of course, here put this lower. So this value is actually pretty decent to work with. So that's a decent base value, I guess. It doesn't have too much polygons, but it still gives us a nice preview of that. So if we go like a little bit lower, let's say 0.1, we might have to again reset simulation, and in a few seconds I will then see my new result. So here we have our new result. As you can see, this is a way more higher poly, but if we go to lit mode, you can see that there is a lot more like subtle details. You can really see like it's having that stairs shape in there. There might be some other values we can tweak here. But yeah, this might be too much, but as you can see, like this is all possible doing, so maybe we can probably just go with like 4. So we have this now. So this is something that's a bit lower on the Polycount. So to test then my UV scale, I would actually need to add a material. The percentage probably also works. Let me quickly check that as well. So if I increase this, we can quickly have a reducing. You can see it goes pretty fast. In here, we can have that normal. So if we lower the normals, you can see the polygons. And then those are simulation options, but those probably also work. Let's, for example, blur this out, and indeed there's some blurring going on. You can see we are losing some of those edging. So those are all working. So what I want to then do is actually checking my UVs and adding a material. So I had a material prepared. It's very basic float one. And we're going to right click. We're going to say get a reference. We're going to jump into Houdini. We're going to use the Unreal material node. Going to place it all the way down here. And we're going to copy paste that path. So this is a reference to the location where this is stored. And you can expose this into your digital asset, like you can grab this into your digital asset. But we can just now save asset. And let's go and rebuild our tool. And it should now, as you can see, have like the proper material here. So let me check if my UV scale is working. So let's increase that. And you can see it's not necessarily working. And there is a reason for that. So if you remember, I actually did the UV scaling before simulation. So that means I have to actually recalculate the whole simulation just to scale up the UV up or down, which is not ideal. So into Houdini, let's double check that again. So here we have the U3, so we have our UV transform, let them do the scaling. So the scaling happens here and simulation happens here. So again, when I change something here, we need to reset or recalculate that simulation. So in this case, it's actually better to do this afterwards. So when we do these calculations, I can, for example, here, after this, reset or rescale the UV. So this means that it's not based on the solver anymore. So this means that it's not depending on the simulation anymore because it's happening afterwards. So that might be interesting to keep in mind if you need to do some sort of like processing of UV or other geometry things, it might be useful to either do them before or after the simulation. So if I now go back and hit save, so in Unreal, we're gonna again hit rebuild. And now if I go to my UV scaling, we can see that this now works almost instantly. So this was to show you that it sometimes can matter where you start to do things, because in some cases you might need to reset the whole simulation before doing like something very simple, like just scaling UV up or down, or for example rotating the UV. It's not something we need to necessarily have to recalculate our whole system for. We can just do it afterwards. So that is our cloth tool here. So everything is ready to go to simulate this cloth on multiple objects. I can now just grab this plane and, for example, put this somewhere here, put this on the other side. And what I need to do is, of course, I need to add the resimulation. I'm going to wait a few seconds, and then we have this result. So in some cases, we might need actually more frames, as you can see. So we can increase this maybe to 40, and that might give it more to fall down. And when you are done simulating your cloth, the only thing left to do is actually go and click the bake button. So when I click the bake button, it will actually be exported as a static object. So into our Houdini Engine folder, we now have a baked object, which is then this cloth, as you can see here. And this is now the usual static model, and you can just use this to decorate other parts in your scene and reuse this in other areas if you want to. So that was it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for watching.